All right. Okay. So last time what did we do? We set up our front end with React, and so now we have a functioning server backend and a functioning client front end with React. So that's awesome.
So let me jump in and make sure. So client is the front end.
Yep.
And where's the back end?
The back end is kind of anything outside of right now. It's basically, I think the only file we have is this file right here, the server file. But that is the entirety of our back end. But once we, we'll start to build more files that live outside of client in the same directory as server, and that's pretty much our back
Love
end.
it. But it's safe to now say that this is a full stack web app at this point.
Yeah. Pretty basic one, but definitely.
One nonetheless.
You got a back end and a front end. Yeah. Okay, so cool. So I think the next thing that I felt like is important and will be a good task for us is to connect those two things, the front end and the back end. So just to be able to like start up our front end in a browser and either click a button or fetch a certain resource from the back end. We don't have a database yet, so we'll just hard code some stuff. But essentially, what we'll do is we'll have our front end ask the back end for some information. The back end will send that information to the front end, and then we'll display it on the browser.
Love it.
Cool. So the first thing that we're gonna do, let's boot up our front end. So if you go into client and then you cd into client, sorry, and
terminal.
Then you have to boot up your terminal, cd into client, and then do yarn start. And that should boot up the client and then start it in the browser for us. And I think one thing that we're going to notice here is that it starts it on port 3000. So once it gets going, it'll start on localhost 3000. And that's sort of a problem for us because we set up our server. Yeah, so I guess we'll just wait until it gets going. I'll cut this part out. I don't know why it takes so long for this thing to start up. Okay.
I don't know why my
your snap's not working?
Yeah. Snap.
Okay, cool. Okay, yeah, so there we go. So it's at localhost 3000. That's fine, but if we go back to, so let's open up that server file that we made. And in this file, you see that we set port as 3000.
Yep.
We can't actually run both of those at 3000 because there can only be one on the
Got
port.
it. So we're trying to run the front and the back end at 3000, but that sort of interferes.
Mm. It's a pretty common like default setting for the port to run, which is why we set them both. Which is why this like sort of boilerplate code that we copied and pasted from Express was 3000 and the React app is 3000.
Interesting. It seems like, let me just get my editorializing. It seems like a slight, very modest improvement to the world if the default for the front end and the back end were just slightly different. But
yeah, you might be right. But I guess to counterpoint is that the React server that's running is also a server in its own right. So that's why it's on port 3000. So like that's a development server that's not going to be there when we're on production. But while we're working locally, we definitely want them on different things. One like side note is that actually React is that development setup is actually smarter than that, and it will actually ask you to go on a different port. So it's honestly fine, but it's probably just good practice to have them on different ones. So so let's change it to 8080. That's like another common one that people use.
Okay.
Don't ask me why, but that's what I see a lot.
I like it.
So okay, cool. So our server's on a different port. That's great. So now we can start up the server and then have that server running at the same time as our development server. So if you once you click on the drop down that says node in your term, so it's like terminal, and then there's the drop down.
Yep.
So go to the first one. Yep. And then so this is a different terminal. We'll start up the server on this one. So just do node server.
And help me understand. So I have a node terminal and a bash terminal.
Yep. It's just two different instances of. Oh, I think you're in the client still. So if you cd back. Oh, bless you.
No, or what?
There you go.
Node what?
Yeah, no. Server.
So that's saying, okay, just run this one, and now I'm firing up the backend, the non-client.
Yeah, so now we got them both fired up at the same time, right?
Right.
We have our client fired up, and we have our server fired up. Both running, simultaneously, which is good. Now, what we want to do is we want to build a component on our front end that's going to talk to our back end. And so to do that, we're going to go back into open back up our app here. I think it should open. Yep. Go to app.jsx.
Go to app.jsx.
Yeah, actually, could you hit the pin again? I don't know why. Oh, okay, cool. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add in a component. We're going to take some of this stuff away and add in our own component that will grab some data from the backend. So what we're going to do is I'm going to make a component in this source file called user message. That should pop up. Yep. So we got user message here, and I'm just going to paste in some code, and then we can go through it just a little bit. And so this is a very basic React component. To make a React component, you just have to import the library. So this is the library, the React library, and then you define a function. You actually have to export function to like that. And that is a very basic version of a React component. So we just define the function and say what it's going to return. It's going to return a div tag with hello user, and then that's it. And then we say export default so we're like exporting this so somebody else can use it. So like a different component can use it.
Got it. And when you say component, is that this entire JSX file? Is that the function from line 3 to 5? What's component referred to?
Yeah. So component is like essentially in this case we're referring to this whole function. Because it's a React function.
Okay.
And you sort of know that because it's returning some JSX here. Like this is not like normal JavaScript. Like this is a React sort of functionality.
Okay.
So there are also class components in React. We won't get into it, but they look slightly different. They'll look like it would be like class user message extends React dot component, and that's like a little more clear what's happening here. You're like, oh, okay, this thing is extending from React. Like that makes sense to me. But with functional components, it's a little less clear. But you'll basically know when you see that we're importing the library, we're defining a function that returns some JSX, and then we're exporting.
Okay, love it.
Yeah, cool. And so now we're going to use that just as an example. So we're going to go back to app.jsx, and then I'll delete this here. So you know that text, and then if you want to try it, maybe you'll try it on yours. So do open bracket, and then start typing. Oh, sorry.
Curly.
The less than. And then type user message.
And it's sort of knows.
Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Yep, exactly. And then you want to close. You want to close the bracket. Oh, that was not supposed to happen. I think usually you just want it like this.
Got it.
There's like an autocomplete thing that sometimes gets confused.
Like bugged out. I probably did something non-standard.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so now if you go to the browser, you should see our little component that we made.
Already?
Yeah. Yep. It should just show. I think it should say hello user.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
And it's. I guess I didn't realize it's going to refresh live. Was it on the save?
Yep, it's on a save. So whenever you save, this sort of dev environment will auto refresh for you.
Got it.
Which is very
so
awesome.
Running this, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding this code. So we've got it around the. Do you call these brackets? symbols?
I do in my head, but I don't think that's right.
Okay, cool. So you've got this, I should think of this as calling a function.
Yeah, actually, you can think of it as calling a React function. Like, it's because this is special JSX, right? Like, we're using JSX, which is like a special version of JavaScript that is React only. But you can sort of think of it like, if we were to compile this and have it be actual vanilla JavaScript, it would look like it's calling a function.
Okay.
But just for the sake of like looking like we're writing HTML in JavaScript, we include it as like kind of a tag, like an HTML tag.
But effectively, it's scanning the client folder for user message.jsx, and then it's going to run what's in there, and we have the export of that function in there, and so it sort of puts it in line 12 here.
Yep, the export actually. Yep, it's loaded into this variable.
It's loaded right here. Okay.
Yep.
So it didn't scan the folder. We did an explicit import, and then you used it. Got it. That's neat.
Yep. So cool. So let's go. So I'm going to go back to user message. And try to do some more dynamic stuff here.
I love that we got it working. We feel good, and now we're going to add complexity to the component that is working.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. It's kind of honestly, it's probably the best way to sort of develop is just kind of do things in steps. So next step is I'm going to make another function called getUser, which is going to be our function that we try to talk to the backend with. And it's pretty simple. Basically, we're using this browser function called fetch. And fetch is, you can look it up on, Google if you want. And there's documentation around it, but basically it's making a request to whatever you put in as the string. So we're going to say, this is our server, localhost 8080. And then we're going to say our route is user. And then hopefully when we get that response, we'll log it to the console.
Got it. And let me just ask you something. So on lines 3 to 6, we're making this getUser function, and we're using, I think that's arrow notation, but 8 to 9, we're creating a user message function, and we're using what at least reads to me to be more standard notation. Are those just notational differences? Or are the functions different in some deeper way?
Nope. So we could also do function get user, or I guess we want this async function get user. So that is the same.
Got it.
I mean, there's some slight differences, but for our use case here, that's functionally the same thing.
Okay.
So here we go, get it. So, and one important thing about this is an async function, and that is denotes that we're probably going to have some code in this block that doesn't necessarily, that we'll be like waiting for a response. And you usually have something like that whenever you connect like with the server or do something that is quote unquote asynchronous, right? Like, so we don't really know when we're going to get a response. This is actually somewhat of a new notation, async, but so basically we're defining this as an async function because we're going to try to fetch this, fetch some data from the server, and we have to wait for that to happen. And that's where we're going to use this await keyword here. So we're basically saying, wait for whatever further response from this fetch.
Okay.
And then put that in this variable.
And so does async usually come with await or with fetch?
Yeah, so not necessarily with fetch. It can be anything that returns a certain type of return value, which is a promise, which we can get into later. But usually you see await with async. So it's oftentimes actually called async await functions.
Nice.
Because you can only use await inside of an async type of function.
Nice.
Cool. Okay, so get user, great. Now we actually have to, because we don't actually have this route, right? There's nothing in our server that can handle this user route. So we got to go back to our server and make that route. So we go back here. And so currently we have one route, right? It's just this one.
Yep.
which is the empty URL. And then it will return hello world. So we could actually go to our browser right now, and instead of going to 3000, if we went to localhost 8080, it would just say hello world.
Okay.
So we want to make another route, but instead we want to have it point to user. So if you want to make, so basically just copy and paste app.get like that stuff, and then instead put /user.
Forward right here?
Yep. And so this is defining our user route.
And
so anytime anyone
help me with the route terminology. I'm not fully following that.
Yeah, so it's just kind of like a way to say that like this is a route in a URL.
Mm-hmm.
So like anytime localhost 8080 /user is sent from the browser, then this function will run.
Got it. It's the route is sort of it's executing different paths of what gets sent according to it. It's a big sort of if-else statement almost.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it's a good way to think about it. And then in particular, so there are different types of requests, and this is more than we need probably right now. But this is a GET request because it says GET. There's also something called a POST request. There's also a delete request. There's like different types of. So like we could have, a GET request to /user. We could have a POST request to /user, and those two things are different.
Okay.
But I think all we need right now is a GET request. And then what we're going to do in there is we're just, instead of returning hello world, we're going to return some JSON. So we're going to return a JSON object that has user with name Neo.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Does that make sense?
Yep. And we're just hard coding the name Neo in there. It's not my name. It's not your name, but we're going to sort of see how that works.
Yep. Our goal is to talk to the server and get this information from the server. And,
got it.
You can imagine like at a certain point we'd want a database, and that database would, so if we said get user, it would talk to the database, find the user in the database, and then actually return the correct.
Got it. But this seems like a great middle ground.
Yeah.
And just to make sure I'm fully contextualizing where we're at, we're in the server file, so we're in the back end. So this is, what's getting sent back from the back end to the front end when the user path hits or the user route hits, and it's going to.
Yep, exactly right. Yep, yeah. So you can think about we're in that user message component, we're sending a request to the back end. The back end catches it, and then it returns this data to the front end.
Okay.
And then the front end catches that and then displays
Okay,
it.
cool.
That's like our goal. Cool. So let's see. We have to. Stand by.
Stand by.
Stand by. Okay, so let's go back to our user message component, which is right here. And we'll actually use this function to grab that information from the database. Not the database, the server. We don't have a database. And so all we're going to do is we're going to call get user inside this function. So when this component runs, so whenever this component, actually we can say renders. Renders is a good thing to say whenever we're talking about React components.
It's amazing how terminology is so important. Sorry, keep going.
Yep. So like every time, so you can imagine like when the browser renders this component, it runs this function and it returns this hello user, and that's like one render. And so then you'll see that on the browser, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's rendering to the browser. Every time it renders, this whole thing runs. And so this will get run first, and then it'll return what you want it to return. So if we go back to our browser, we'll have to inspect the console and see if we get our console log.
And then go right click, inspect.
Yes. Cool. And then if you go down to the bottom where console lives.
Right here?
Yep. And we got some red, so let's zoom in. Yeah, so okay. Yep, there we go. Okay, so we got some red there. It says access to fetch at localhost 8080/user from origin blah from localhost 3000, which is our dev server, has been blocked by CORS policy. And that is a lot of words, but CORS stands for cross-origin resource sharing, and it's somewhat like of a complicated. Well, it's not actually that complicated, but it's just like a mechanism to make. It's like a security mechanism, and in this case, it's preventing. It's blocking requests from origins that aren't the same as localhost 8080.
Okay.
And since we're coming from 3000, it's like, oh, you can't do that because you're not from 8080. And so this is kind of a problem that we're going to run into locally, but won't necessarily be a problem later.
Got it. So are we going to resolve it, or are we just going to say like, oh, this is a local only problem, so we can kind of skip by it?
We're going to resolve it. So let's go.
And then before you jump there, just contextualize. So I've seen this before, but I've never fully digested it. You're able to, in Google Chrome, or I presume other browsers as well, you're able to right click and inspect the code operating behind the website. And by doing that, in console is like the terminal of the website, and I'm able to actually see errors and everything in a debuggy kind of fashion.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, so like any of your code that's client code is sent to the browser and can be inspected by anybody, right? And so that's like always something you want to keep in mind as a web developer.
Client is front end.
Client is front end. Nothing is safe in the client.
If it's in the front end, it's like in the inspect, and you have, I think, a cool example. I feel like I've seen examples of this where a website will be asking students math questions, and then they send the answer to the front end, so the student can just right click inspect and they get the solution.
Totally. Yeah, totally. So I mean, of course, that's like not an actual security risk, but like that is like something that you always want to think about as a developer, that you're like not sending sensitive information to the client because anyone can see
what's available to who, when, and sort of in what state. Cool.
Yep. And then, so to answer your question, the console is anything that we say console.log that will log it to the console.
Okay.
And you can kind of play in the console the same way that you would play in like the Node console that we've done before. So if you could do math in it, like anything that you type in that console, you can kind of play around with.
Great.
And cool. So let's fix this CORS error so we can actually grab resources from so that we can actually talk to our server. So let's go back to server.js in your editor.
Server.js.
Sweet.
This is in client, or no? This is our backend.
This is our backend. Yep. So we're back into our backend, and we want to make it so our backend accepts those requests from port 3000.
So we don't get that error.
So we don't get the error. So we'll have to. There's a nice package that we can use for this. So if you go into your console and stop the server, we'll install the package.
How do you stop it? Just like Control-C?
Control-C.
Sweet.
And then just do yarn add CORS, CORS.
CORS. So this is a common error, and someone's created a package, and if you know about the package, you can install it and use it.
Yep. And it's an error that exists just because it's like a good security, like it's good that it exists, right? But we just have to make sure that for our local development purposes, we want to kind of get around it. And so so it's installed. So now if we can include, so we can tell our app to use it. So if I'm going to paste this in. Actually, we have to also. So we're just going to also require it. So in the same way that we require the Express library right here, we're going to require the CORS library. And then we're going to use that. So we're going to add this into our app. So app.use, make our app. We're going to use it. And CORS returns a function, and we're going to call that function. and then we're going to say here, this is okay as an origin. We're going to say that we allow requests from localhost 3000 to happen.
Got it.
In practice, we probably want to do some sort of check to make sure that we're on production or not in production, but for our case, this is totally fine.
And remind me what just connect it. What's the term CORS refer to?
Yeah, it's cross-origin resource sharing, which just means that for now, the localhost 8080 will only accept requests from localhost 8080. So it's not cross-origin. Does that make sense? It's not like a different origin from where it's not different from 8080. Yep. But we're saying, okay, we want to allow something from something other than 8080.
Got it.
And we want 3000.
Cross-origin resource sharing. Cool.
Yep. Okay, so now I think, we got to start. So can you start up the server again? So just do node server.
And starting, so
you do yarn start.
I'm in the base. I'm not starting the client. I'm starting when you say, so server client, I just need to wrap my mind around these. Server is the back end and client is the front end. And I think of if I walk into, a haircutting shop, the client interaction happens on the front end and the server interaction's the thing in the back room with fans whirling or something. Haircut's maybe a bad example, but server's back end, client's front end, client's user facing.
Yeah. And like in the front end, the users or the people coming in don't ever see that back area, right?
Maybe ask to go to the bathroom and you run into it, but you kind of...
Yeah. Then there's a security flaw and you don't want them to see that. So just do notes.
Okay, I was too excited about the analogy. I stopped thinking.
Okay, cool. So we have the server back up and running. Looks like we didn't get any errors, so I think everything's good.
So guys, see something in the browser now?
So now, if we save, we should be able to see that in the browser.
Let's go browser hanging out. Should I refresh or?
Refresh it.
And keep the console up so we can actually see.
Ooh. Okay, so yep. So we got some responses.
So we're good.
So we're good.
Yeah!
So I think it worked. Great. You can actually click on that response in the console and it'll drop down and show you all the stuff inside it. That's cool. Doesn't actually give us much information right now. Okay, that's awesome. So let's go back to our code. So now that we know that we're at least getting something back from the server, now we have to figure out how to display that to a user.
Okay.
So I'm going to open back this, get user, and I'm going to add in, this is actually just, so we're going to hop back and see something quick. So now I'm going to
You're editing the user message, what do I call this? Component.
Yep.
Terminology is learning.
So I'm just
terminology is
it is and so this all I'm doing here is just converting this response into JSON. So what happens is this response actually exposes a method called JSON, which I'm just calling here, and then that returns some JSON that we'll be able to see. So actually go back to your browser real quick. We should actually be able to see that response now. Yep. So if you click on those last two,
right here.
Yep.
Neo, hey, there you are, Bucko.
Yep. And so there's our data that we got from the server.
So we now know that we have Neo available, and there's another task just to I could make Neo display on the screen, but I know it's here because I can see it in the console.
Yeah. Yep. So we got Neo to the front end from the back end, which is awesome.
Cool.
And so our next task is to display it actually on in our component. So what I'll do, I'm gonna instead of logging into the console, I'm just gonna return it. So now this function, gets the user and returns the user object. And so what we can do here is instead of just calling it, we'll assign it to a variable, right? So the user equals get user. That get user response is going to assign whatever the response is to the user, and then we can insert that into our tag here. So in theory, it should actually, this should be user.name, right? That should show the user.
Cool.
In practice, though, I don't think this is going to work. So if you go back to your console.
Oh.
Yeah, so we ran into some problems here. So it says not valid as a React child, found promise, found object promise, and that's because what we're doing is this is an async function. So because it's asynchronous, it actually has to wait for a response in order to print anything. And so when we call it, JavaScript doesn't actually, if you go back to the code, jump way back. When this function runs, this will run, and this will immediately run after it, right? Like it doesn't stop for this one. And since this one is actually waiting for some response from the server, it doesn't have anything to display. All it says, it's actually a promise that it's going to say, I promise to return something eventually, but I'm not ready yet.
It's like unevaluated, so there's sort of an order of an events issue.
Yep, exactly, yeah. And since this doesn't stop, then it just tries to put it in and display it here, but it can't because it's just a promise, and then that's why you get that error. Okay. So we have to figure out a way to have this render, but then also get this from the database, from the server, and then at some point later, re-render when we finally get the results. And so to do that, we have to actually save something called state within the component. So component state is like, you can think of as like saving data for later. So let's think if I can do something that makes sense. But so when you refresh,
go to browser and refresh.
So, oh no, sorry. I was just trying to think of something.
I gotcha.
Okay, so we'll try to make a state for the user, right? And so when it first renders, it doesn't have any data because it has to get that from the server, right? And so that user is going to be empty. And let's put that in there. So we use this function called useState, which is a React thing. So we'll import that actually from the library. Cool. And so we'll set this initial state with our useState function as name nothing because we don't know the name yet, right? Because we haven't gotten it from the server. Yeah, let me take that out. So the first time this renders, it's going to have a user with name nothing. This will be an empty string. At some point later, we're going to want to set the state and change it and update it once we get this response, right? Do you follow? Does that make sense?
And so we need to just need to indicate it to update at the right time. Yep.
And so actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this function into our component. And so now, instead of returning this, I'm going to say set user as our JSON. So basically, when this get user function runs, it'll get it from the server. It'll wait for the response, and then once it gets the response, it'll set the user, which is this function that we get from this function. There's a lot of functions here, and then finally it'll re-render and hopefully show the correct name. So like the first render, it's going to go through this. It's going to be blank, and then we're going to hopefully run this. And then set the user, and then it'll re-render and show it.
Cool. And let me just scroll just to make sure. So now we have, we're doing this nested function, which is going to allow for the timing to work best. When this runs, does it actually run the set user, or does it just initialize the get user function?
Great question. When this function, which is the component, runs, it just initializes the function. So we're not actually ever calling it.
Got it. Okay. Which is actually advantageous because our problem before was the ordering.
Yep. Yeah. And so that's a really good point because let's try this. This will probably actually not be good, but so like now we're actually going to call the function. And so if you can visualize what's going to happen here, right? Like, so we set this function as this variable, we call it, and then you can kind of go back in here and actually this runs, we set the user. So all this is great so far. The one thing about state in React is that anytime this state changes, it re-renders. So this whole thing will get rendered again. And that's important because then you can imagine this goes, and then this goes, and then this goes again. And then we do the whole thing again, right? And so we're in this loop. We're in this like infinite loop that whenever we actually get the user from the back end, it sets it, and then it re-renders this whole thing. And then it does it again. The nifty thing about state is that it actually does save. So like on the next re-render, it will actually be the user's name, which is good because so that's actually not that is not resetting to the empty string. It'll be the new user. But the problem here is that every time we run it, it's
going to keep going. It's not okay. So we sort of solved one problem and opened another one.
Yep. So to nail this point home, I'm going to log the JSON.user every time this runs. So in theory, if I'm right, this will go log a bunch of stuff to the console just because it'll be re-rendering every time it gets sends a request. Okay, cool. So I'm going to save that, and then once it's saved, let's check out, see what it does now.
So we're now going to just get to see more stuff because we'll get the logs. Yep.
There it goes. Yep.
So it works. It's just really inefficient because it keeps running.
Totally. Yeah. It just is. This is like probably not great because it'll overload our server eventually if you have like too many users. It's just like making tons and tons of requests. So we'll have to figure out a way to get around that. And what we do is we use another nifty little React thing called use effect. And this is actually a hook. It's kind of like a hard thing to explain, but they call them hooks. So anything with the use in front, it's like use state, use effect. These are React hooks. Okay. And I think it's hooked because like they, actually I don't know a good explanation.
Hook it onto something and it makes it better.
It's a hook because there are certain life cycles of the component that they hook into, right? And so like when it renders, a certain thing can happen. And that's what we're like hooking into. And so in this case, use effect here, we have to actually import it as well. So this hook is going to run this function whenever anything in this dependency array changes. So like this could be anything, but since we don't have any other variables, there's nothing really to show. But since it's empty, it only runs once, and that's on the first render. So we gotta do this. So effectively, that should solve our problem, right? Because on the first render, after the first render, I mean, this will run, and then it'll only run that one time. Subsequent renders, it will not run. Because we don't have anything in this array.
Because it's empty.
If this array, yeah, exactly. And if I put user in here, then we'd run into our unlimited.
You get back into
Yep, because every time user changes, then this runs, right? It's like, oh, user changed, I'm going to run this again.
Got it.
But we don't want to do that. We want to leave it empty. Just do it once at the beginning. So I think if we head over to that console again, it should be all clear. There it is. Sweet.
Got it. All right, neat.
Sweet. Okay. And so that accomplishes what we want, right? We wrote a function inside of a component that talks to the server, gets some information from the server sends back a user object that we hard coded, and then displays it on the screen. So hello Neo.
Right.
So Neo is nowhere in the front end. That's completely from the back end.
It's got it. It's coming to the. What do you mean when you say it's nowhere in the front end? I'm tempted to be like, Tanner, it's right here.
Right. Yeah. So sorry, it's not hard coded anywhere in the front end. It's that data is coming from the back end.
We're one step closer to for every user being able to literally put their name. I'll get a Ben. I'll be happy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Of course, like the next step would be to add like a database, right? That stores all your user information, and when you log in, it sends that information or some of that information to the front end.
Future things to look forward to.
Definitely.